What if the first time you stayed silent as a child was the exact moment your shadow was born? Neuroscience proves that when parents ignore our feelings, our brains literally shut down parts of our personality to ensure we stay connected to the family. Today, we are digging into the shame origin story to understand how childhood silence rewires your adult brain and locks your true potential in a neural vault. The invisible scar, understanding how childhood silence shapes the brain as a survival mechanism. When a child grows up with nothing but hushed corners, the brain begins to act like a house of mirrors, reflecting only the shadows of what never happened. Researchers using fMRI have found that kids who experience prolonged silence or emotional neglect show an amygdala that lights up even with harmless sounds, as if listening to a storm that isn't there. That constant alarm train builds a silent map inside the mind, marking areas that cannot surface without a threat of criticism. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that weighs choices and tames impulses, lets the amygdala run wild. In practical terms, this means the child might feel tight in their chest when anyone speaks, fearing that words will flood in, drag them into blame, and expose their unspoken wounds. The brain's natural response, an instinctive emotional delete button, pushes the shameful moments into the neural vault. This vault is filled with chunks of memory that are locked away, but still whisper through dreams and gut feelings. Imagine a child who hears, "You're not good enough," every time they ask a question. The vault records that negative code as a safety cue. Over time, the child becomes a quiet observer of their own life, keeping conversations at a distance, where the lab says the left hemisphere language areas show fewer attachments. The practical outcome is a hidden layer of behavior that adults call the Jungian shadow, those parts of ourselves that we don't consciously recognize but that influence decisions, reactions, and emotional moods. Take the example of a teenager named Maya. She never received praise for her schoolwork. Her parents always mentioned only mistakes. As an adult, she struggles to accept applause, thinking it will invite criticism. Neuroimaging reveals her emotional delete button has been rewired to trigger rapid amygdala activation when someone offers compliments. Maya's subconscious stores this loop in the silent map, preventing her from enjoying success. She may unconsciously project fear onto others, demanding they be as quiet as she is, in a bid to keep the vault from opening. The scenario showcases how early silence strengthens the shadow, making it a quiet, unspoken force that shapes life trajectories and relationships. What does this mean for today's mind? Recognizing that silence is a lasting imprint helps explain why some adults still feel haunted by childhood. If we acknowledge the neural vault and consciously read the silent map, we can begin to soften the emotional delete button's trigger. Simple practices, mindful breathing, repeating supportive affirmations, or even gentle professional counseling, act like unlocking a door in that vault. The shadow does not have to stay hidden. It can be acknowledged and integrated, letting the brain rewire in a place where voice becomes safe rather than a threat. The science of suppression, how mirror neurons and fear conditioning build the architecture of your shadow. A word, "no," shouted from a voice that had always been warm, can leave a scar that shadows your adult life. That scar sits deep in your neural vault, where shame is quietly catalogued. Scientists know that when a child hears a harsh judgment, the amygdala, a small almond-shaped structure, ignites a burst of fear. The brain's mirror neurons, which normally help us learn by watching others, quickly link that fearful feeling to the image of the critic. Over time, the brain creates a silent map, a hidden route that reroutes emotions whenever a similar situation arises. The child learns that being praised is a brief, flickering candle, while criticism feels like an eternal furnace. In the long run, the brain's emotional delete button presses itself against that criticism, erasing it from conscious memory, but leaving the feeling stuck in the shadows. When the emotional delete button is engaged, the shameful memory doesn't vanish. It is simply tucked away so the eye can't see it. Yet the fear conditioning stays active. Imagine walking into a room and feeling an undertow of unease, even without knowing why. That trembling comes from the amygdala, still primed to react whenever a scenario triggers the old criticism. Mirror neurons reinforce it. Seeing others' censure silently nudges your own brain to match the toll. The result is a shadow that riddles your self-image. The shadow hides in the corners of your thoughts, like a ghost pressed against a dusty window. Every time you face a challenge, the silent map fires, and that old voice resurrects, saying, "You're not good enough." The shame-locked neural pathways, built in childhood, outline the shadow's architecture, giving it a firm shape that can only be rewired through gradual exposure and compassionate self-education. This architecture is built through a surprisingly simple recipe: attention, repetition, and emotional intensity. A teacher's passive disapproval, a sibling's teasing, or a parent's sigh can each become an anchor point in the neural vault. Repeating that anchor with varying intensity forms a lattice that the brain finds hard to dismantle. Yet the lattice can be cracked if a kind, present voice says, "You deserve to make mistakes." That new voice creates a competing path, disconnecting the old memory's grip. When a child starts looking at criticism as a learning signal instead of a verdict, the shadow's walls begin to crumble. In practical terms, the shadow manifests as inexplicable panic, self-doubt, or an inflated sense of inadequacy. You may notice that your mind glosses over minor faults while magnifying major ones, exactly how the emotional delete button nudges your perceptions. Recognizing this pattern is the first step toward rewiring. Join a therapist or a support group that practices mindful listening. When you hear yourself use "I'm not enough," pause and ask, "Why does this feel so real?" Use gentle curiosity to explore the past without judgment. The silent map will slowly shift, and the once dense neural vault will begin to empty, allowing new, healthier pathways to surface. The amygdala's map, why early shame creates a lifelong, hyper-vigilant threat detection system. Kids who grow up hearing harsh words about themselves feel a constant crackle in their inner radio, as if every whispered judgment tuned a tiny alarm to constant, high-volume mode. The auditory channel here is the amygdala, an almond-shaped cluster deep in the brain that treats fear like a ticking bomb. When a child is shamed, the amygdala instantly spikes, sending a surge of adrenaline and cortisol to the rest of the body. This is not a one-off flicker. It's a pattern laid down early and rewired into habit. Each episode of shame writes a new entry into what neuroarchaeologists call the silent map of threat. Old trauma erases the calm checkpoints and builds a worn path of worry that lasts a lifetime. The amygdala runs a low-level, reflexive loop that bypasses slower, thinking parts of the brain. Victims of shame internalize the telltale sign. If you look safe, you're probably in danger. The result is a hyper-alert state, almost like a watchdog on a feral leash. When someone naively smiles or gestures at a sibling, the alarm in the amygdala goes off, the brain pushes the rest of the body to tense, and a sense of impending judgment surfaces almost instantaneously. The brain's fear circuitry has been so tuned that even the tiniest flicker of approval burns like a scar, feeding the loop. In laboratory studies, children who report high levels of shame show stronger amygdala responses to neutral faces compared to peers free of such shame. That stronger response predicts chronic anxiety, avoidance, and even depressive episodes later on. In real life, a teen who once feared parents' criticism can become overly cautious on first dates, pausing, doubting, or even shutting down, because the amygdala screams danger at the mere thought of potential embarrassment. Even with a supportive adult now, the hypervigilant loop stubbornly keeps running, erratically flipping the emotional delete button the brain uses to forget the earlier insults. The long-term, nightmare-like impact can be imagined as if a child's brain had built a massive neural vault filled with shards of shame, each shard reflecting a moment of judgment. Every time the vault is opened by the slightest reminder, the amygdala launches its alarm, lighting a floodlight across the room. Self-compassion practices, mindful breathing, and consistent positive reinforcement can slowly chip away at those shards. By reinforcing new, safe triggers, the brain begins to rewrite the hidden script. Threat isn't always present, and safety can coexist with agency. The shift is gradual and not a single revelation. It requires stepping, one foot at a time, past the echo of first-time shaming and toward a calmer, more balanced internal map. The emotional delete button, the biological process of how your mind hides trauma to ensure group belonging. A child who once cried over a broken toy might never open his mouth again. That first sting of shame gets sewn into the brain like a hidden seam. The brain, eager to keep a family together, swallows the painful memory and pushes it into a backroom vault so that future faces will not see its shadow. Scientists find that the amygdala, the fear hub, tags the experience as dangerous. When a parent says, "You are messy, you're wrong," the amygdala lights up. At the same time, the hippocampus starts to tuck the memory away, layering it with new associations so it is easier to forget. The prefrontal cortex, the rational thinker, quietly jumps in, deciding that it is safer to keep the roar of shame behind closed doors. This biological teamwork is what the mind calls the emotional delete button. When memories are hidden, they do not disappear. They travel to a special shelf called the neural vault. In the neural vault, the brain keeps them under lock and key. The brain's wiring is crafted to protect the individual from being ostracized. If a child replayed the shame story each time they smelled a dust pail, the group would notice discomfort. By slipping the story into the vault, the child can look out into the world without attracting the same stigma. The silent map shows how the hidden shame influences everyday choices. If a person suddenly feels uneasy before speaking up in a meeting, that unease is their brain's subtle reminder that they once were branded as wrong. Their behavior shifts, perhaps avoiding leadership roles or enjoying small, safe conversations. The silent map is invisible but powerful, helping the brain follow a trail of avoidance that keeps the shadow from showing. Understanding this process helps us recognize that our unease or chronic self-criticism might trace back to a childhood sentence that was trapped behind an emotional deletion switch. Instead of suffering in silence, we can start to step outside the vault by gently talking to the shy parts of ourselves. Practically, this could involve mindfulness, journaling what feels hidden, or speaking with a therapist who can guide the brain to reopen its stored doors safely. By acknowledging the vault's purpose, protecting us from exclusion, we can decide whether to keep it closed or lighten the load it holds. Reclaiming the disowned. Simple steps to recognize and integrate the childhood shadows that run your life. A single, flying high word from a parent can become a lifetime scar. Research shows that when children hear "you're not good enough," their brain labels that sound as a threat, embedding shame into deep-lying circuits that today's self-talk still accesses. The neural fingerprints of that moment appear whenever a new challenge arises, so that the child-born self stays locked in a defensive trance. Like a neuroarchaeologist, I sift through these deep layers, tracing the echoes of criticism as they burrow into the neural vault. In this vault, the most stubborn shards sit quietly under the silent map of early beliefs, hiding just beyond everyday awareness. As a graduate of the brain's detective school, I know that the emotional delete button isn't a simple switch. It's the brain's shorthand for shutting down helplessness, a self-protective reaction that often clocks in as the "I can't do this" thought. The first practical move is to map the attack patterns. Pay attention to moments when self-critique spikes, a new project, a social event, even a quiet reflection. Write down the exact words of judgment: "I'm not smart enough," "I'll fail," or "they'll notice my flaw." These phrases are like keys that unlock the hidden vault. Once you notice them, the next step is to label them for real. Give each judgment a name, as if you're cataloging artifacts. Labeling reduces their power. The brain energies that once pumped into the emotional delete button now shift into a casement of curiosity. Finally, replace the old artifact with a fresher one. Each time the shame trigger hits, pause and insert a new narrative. "I can grow in this area," or "I'm learning, and that's okay." Repetition and gentle self-talk let the old patterns slowly disintegrate, freeing you to move through life without the automatic weight of childhood conditioning. With each new story, the silent map becomes clearer, and the neural vault opens wider, holding a richer, more authentic image of yourself. Shocking truth: the first time you heard "no" or "wrong" as a kid carved something into your brain that still tells a story today. Picture me as a neuroarchaeologist, brushing back dust from the neural vault, uncovering the tiny hidden scars left by early shame. Those scars, hidden on the silent map of your mind, don't just whisper. They hammer a command into the circuitry, a command that keeps a part of you in the shadows. The bigger story is simple. When a child is struck by shame, the brain doesn't erase that feeling, it locks it away. That lock becomes the seed of the Jungian shadow, an unseen set of thoughts, emotions, and impulses that live just out of sight. It's the part of us that was deemed unworthy, the dark side that is actually a fringe of vulnerability waiting to be understood. So what did we learn? 1. Shame starts early and attaches itself to the neural vault, making a fossil-like mark in our neural pathways. 2. That mark is secretly mapped by the silent map, turning our internal landscape into a hidden archive. 3. The emotional delete button never truly resets, leaving the memory in deep shadows. 4. Together, these create the Jungian shadow, an invisible but powerful presence that shapes actions and self-image. Now that you see the map, you might wonder what to do with this knowledge. Recognizing the shadow isn't a moral judgment. It's a first step toward a fuller, less filtered self. I've seen many people move from feeling stuck in shame to harnessing the shadow as a source of creative power. If this was as eye-opening for you as it was for me, hit like and consider subscribing so we can keep digging together. Drop a comment below if you've noticed your own hidden marks or share what's quietly living inside your mind. No judgment, just conversation. In our next episode, we'll explore a practical technique to tap into the shadow's strengths, turning those no-s of childhood into the yes-s of adulthood. Stay curious, keep listening to your brain's little whispers, and I'll see you next time.